Hello, everybody. Welcome to the last of our 6 sessions of this wonderful, wonderful series, Extraordinary Women, with Dr. Anna Urowitz-Freudenstein. This is our last one. However, I know all of you like it, so stay tuned for an announcement. Today's topic is Ancient Israelite Women Known from Archeological Findings. Interesting topic, Anna. As usual, please put your questions into the Q&A and Anna will stop halfway through and we'll ask your questions. So enjoy the discussion today. I know I'm going to. Anna?
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for that lovely introduction, Carol. Today we are changing things up a little bit. I have heard anecdotally from some people when they've been coming to the class is that most of the women that we've been studying so far, not all, that they think that maybe they should have heard of them or heard more about them in Hebrew school or in Jewish day school, and they were very sorry that they hadn't, or maybe they hadn't remembered, but they probably didn't because it wasn't as much of a concentration. So today's women that we're going to be discussing, it's 3 different women, are drastically different in that you would not have heard about them in Jewish day school because they do not appear in any Jewish books, in any Jewish formal texts. We know about them from archaeological findings. And so if you haven't heard of them, don't be surprised. You probably have not heard of them. And that's especially why I'm especially excited to share them with you today so that you do get to know them a little bit and the context in which they live. And then maybe try to think about, we'll try to think a little bit about why it is these women's memories were preserved for us in this way, and maybe reflect a little bit on why other women's weren't in a similar way, at least that we know of. In putting together today's presentation, I've been, that I tried to put in some kind of a multimedia feature into our discussion so that you not only see words and text, which I'll be sharing with you in a moment, but sometimes when there has been classical paintings or other things, I've tried to include them to kind of liven up the lecture. And as a matter of fact, actually, I owe an apology to an anonymous person, I don't know who it was, once asked me if there was a website where they could access biblical paintings connected specifically with biblical text, like to kind of use it as a search engine to find it. And I thought there was one that I was familiar with in the past, and I actually looked for it and haven't been able to find it. So any of the paintings that I shared with you, I really found using Google search images myself. So I just was the default to that. So I'm sorry if I wasn't able to provide that resource that someone asked about. Okay, so but the reason why I was thinking about it is because none of those classical sources actually have painted any of these women that we are going to learn about today. Because if we didn't know about them from the Bible, then medieval Christian painters didn't know about them either. Okay, so with that kind of interesting introduction, I'm going to go over and start sharing the screen. Okay, so as I said, here's our title, Ancient Israelite Women Known from Archaeological Findings. And we're going to be studying 3 different women. Okay, now I thought that it would be only fair to share with you again our timeline that I showed to you once before. And actually it's recommended to me to put the link in the chat. So it's there for you in case you ever want to access it on your own or play around with it. If you were here a few weeks ago, I introduced this very cool tool to you where all of Jewish history is summarized here on the screen in front of you. I know the type is very tiny, so it's hard to read it, but the beauty of it is when you're playing with it, you can play around with it, enlarge the screen as necessary. Also, you can hover over certain things and click on them, and more information is provided for you. So I just wanted to share it with you today. Oh, sorry, too many pop-ups. So that you can begin to realize the time periods that we're covering here today. Um, 2 to 3 different time periods. So the first time period is here in the year around here in the minus 500s or the minus 400s. Okay, was this in the before the Common Era time? So we're counting. I'm sorry for all these pop-ups. We're counting backwards in time, and we're starting around the 400s, and that's the first woman that we'll be studying about in that time period. As you can see on top, it says Persia. That's because she lived in the Persian Empire, but we'll see she lived in Egypt when it was under the Persian Empire. And it was after the destruction of the first temple, which was in 586 BCE. We'll talk about that a little bit also. Then, just so you know what we're looking forward to, the next woman that we're studying, that we know from archaeology in the land of Israel, comes from around this time period, around the year, the beginning of the 100s CE of the Common Era, just after the destruction of the second temple, and we'll talk about that. And then a little bit later is our next woman, and she lived under the Roman Empire, as did the woman living in Israel. But instead of in Israel, she lived in what is modern day Turkey. So you don't have to memorize any of that. Don't worry for the quiz at the end. Just kidding, no quiz. I'm going to be sharing all of that information with you on the screen. But for the people that like to see the history laid out in front of them and how it fits together that way on the timeline, I thought it would be interesting to share this resource and go through it. But now we'll be going through each of those ideas in much more detail and a little bit more slowly also. Okay, so our first woman's name is Mibtachia. Now, I don't know about any of you, but I don't speak ancient Egyptian or the Persian or Aramaic language, actually, that would have been spoken in that time period. So I'm not 100% sure I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but we'll try this at least. Mibtachia, that's her name. Now, I just wanted to show you where she lived. She lived on an island in the middle of, not the middle, an island in the Nile River. Okay, everyone's heard of the Nile River. Here it is in Egypt. And I guess there are a number of islands, and this one in particular is called Elephantine or Elephantine. It's pronounced differently by different people. There's a number of theories as to why it has that name. For any Hebrew speakers in the room, it's called Yev, which is not really connected, but the island of Yev in Hebrew, or Elephantine as we refer to in English, is here in Egypt. And at this point, as we'll see in a minute, Egypt was part of the Persian Empire. So this is sometime we'll see in the 6th century BCE. So in the 6th century BCE, we're learning a little bit about the location where she lived in order to understand her Jewish community. As I said, on this island in the Nile River that was ruled, Egypt in general was ruled by the Persian Empire. It was a site of a large military camp. At this point, the Persians had taken over the Babylonian Empire, so there definitely was military incursions. And that military camp was staffed with foreign mercenaries. A mercenary is a soldier for pay. So they don't necessarily reflect the same ethnicity as the country or empire for which they are fighting. So amongst those foreign mercenaries, there were actually Jewish regiments of soldiers. So they were Jews who were living in this obviously diaspora community sometime after the destruction of this first temple and the exile that would have come with it. Many of those Jews who were exiled ended up settling in diaspora communities, including this one in Elephantine. And many of them in this community made their living by being soldiers for the Persian Empire. And these Jewish soldiers evidently established a Jewish community there because they weren't just single men soldiers living alone, but they were permitted to raise families and to engage in business. So this is how we understand how the heck a Jewish community sprung up on this island. It came from this. All right, so now we know a little bit about the Jewish community, but now we're going to learn even more about it. So I'm sorry, I just see someone has raised their hand. So the way we do questions is that you're supposed to type your question into the comment box, and then we'll do questions in about 10 minutes. They'll do our first round of questions. Thank you. All right, so this Jewish community evolved differently than the Jewish community in the land of Israel that at that time was starting to return to the land of Israel after they'd been exiled, the destruction of the first temple under the Babylonians. The Persian Empire, which was the next empire, allowed them to return to Israel. So not all of them did. Some remained in diaspora communities, including this one we're talking about. And the ones that lived very far away and were not as connected to the rest of the people, or the core of the Jewish people who were regathering in Jerusalem and the surrounding areas, the ones that were far away sometimes evolved their Judaism in a far away, different way as well. So in fact, this community in Elephantine ended up building their own temple that probably had sacrifices in it, something that would not have been allowed in the rest of centralized Judaism. And they even had idol worship there. We have remnants, and again, people know this from the archaeological record, that there were two local goddesses that were also worshipped in addition to God. So they considered themselves Jewish. They had Jewish roots, but their Judaism was evolving differently. Nevertheless, that we're talking about them. So the reason that we know about them today is that archives of them written on papyri, which is a precursor to paper, were written in Aramaic, which is a language that was spoken across that area, actually for hundreds of years. Different Aramaic, for instance, was used to hundreds of years later write the Babylonian Talmud. But this is an earlier form of Aramaic, probably using a different script, a different font, let's say. But nevertheless, archaeologists, thank God, know how to read it. And amongst their extensive group of Bahara they learned about the legal and social system that this community adhered to. And amongst all the documents they found 10 of them, which actually is quite a bit, related to one specific Jewish woman, and that is the woman that we're talking about, Babatha. So I thought it was really important to put her in the historical context because it's such an unusual historical context. Nevertheless, so cool that the archaeologists were able to piece together information from these, as we'll see, these legal documents that concerned her, in order for us to learn a little bit more about an individual's life who was living in this complex, unusually, but still Jewish society. So we even know when she was born and when she died, right? The years are here in front of you. You see, we're counting backwards because we're in the minuses here. We're in the time before the year zero. And as you'll see, we learned that she had two sons from her second marriage. Let's start off with her first marriage, though. She married at age 17. We even have the name of her husband. Again, I'm not so great with these pronunciations. And now here comes the interesting part in terms of wealth. And we'll see that she had a tremendous amount of wealth. She received a house as a wedding gift from her father. So you might have thought, okay, fine, a wedding present for her husband and wife. But no, apparently there were two houses they owned. One the husband did, one the wife did. I'm not sure if they lived alone or maybe one was like an investment property. I'm not sure. No one knows. But we do know that the gift of a house that she received from her father came with an accompanying document signed by 12 witnesses. And apparently that was very unusual. It made it really legit, that guaranteed that the house would remain hers no matter what, even after the death of her father. So it wasn't like conditional on him or on their relationship. So she was the sole owner. And it even stipulated, this document, that, oh no, I'm sorry, that was the end of that document. But then we know from other documents that this first husband ended up dying before any children were born. And so there was no issue with any fighting over inheritance. And she got to inherit the house that he had owned, and she kept her house. I mean, I suppose there could have been other family members that might have fought over the inheritance, that it shouldn't go to a woman. But in fact, she now had two houses, and we'll see that she had even more wealth than that. From the next little piece here, we learn an interesting piece about, again, this, as I said, the Jewish community was evolving differently in terms of their adherence to the commandments than Judaism was evolving in the land of Israel at the same time. We see that because here at age 27, she married again. This one, she married an Egyptian, a non-Jewish man. We even have his name, Eshur. We know his profession, was an architect. And the interesting thing is, we don't know the details how or why, but later he became identified by a Hebrew name, Natan. So the assumption is that he went through some kind of conversion process while they were already married. So I think we can learn something there. I wish I knew what the conversion process was. That detail is not given to us, but we can certainly see, I would imagine, how important Judaism and the Jewish community was to her, because even though on one hand she agreed to marry a non-Jewish man, in the end, it was important for her or for them for him to convert. So this particular marriage document that we have, again, as part of this archive, explains a number of interesting details about the wedding. One is that the bride could leave the marriage with whatever she brought in. So much that we're talking about today has to do with financial freedom and the importance of money. I hate to say it, but the importance of money in terms of establishing oneself, establishing one's independence, and perhaps leaving a written record for your immediate descendants and legalities that would be involved in your life and your death, but that got preserved for us for so many years, and that's why we're able to learn about her and the other two women who we will learn about soon. All right, so again, talking more about money, it said that in the case of death, the surviving spouse would inherit the other's property, whether it be the husband or the wife, and that a husband could not suddenly announce that he had another wife and children without facing a fine. That's very interesting. Of course, at the time, there was that kind of polygamy. You were allowed to have more than one wife, but here he had to be completely upfront about it. And again, this would have affected the finances as well. And then finally, even though this turned out to be a Jewish marriage, it turns out that either spouse could initiate a divorce. And that is certainly not the case as Judaism evolved in the land of Israel and later into Rabbinic Judaism. As a matter of fact, it continues to be an issue until this day in traditional Judaism that the husband is the one who must initiate and give the divorce, and the woman just receives it. So it's an inherent inequality that sometimes leads to problems within traditional Judaism even today. And it turns out that in ancient Persian Egypt, the Jewish community did not have that problem, that either spouse could initiate a divorce. So then we learn finally in another document that in fact she had so much wealth, she also had slaves. Of course, slaves were also a sign of wealth. That she even had another house. She had another house that she was able to get from her father. This would have been a second one that was equal to only 1/3 of a loan that she had given him. Okay, so lovely relationship between daughter and father, married, older daughter and father. But she had enough money that she had control over, that she could lend her father a tremendous amount of money, so much so that the house that he gave her only covered 1/3 of the loan. So we really see that she had a lot of money, and that she had real estate. Of course, still today, real estate is such a great way, I'm told. I have no personal experience, but to make money, and that she had control to do over it, with it, what she wanted, as well as she had so much control over the rest of her life. So I'm just going to end it here by saying why this is really so very interesting. She's so very interesting to us for so many reasons. First of all, we can put I was going to say a face to the name. We have no face. We can put a name to an individual who would have lived in this unusual Jewish community in ancient times. She's a woman. She obviously was wealthy. She obviously had tremendous amount of control over herself and over her wealth. And apparently she is, according to scholars, the first Jewish named woman, for whom we have original documentation that is from outside of the Bible, of course. So I've started to set the stage for you. I've given you our first woman. We have two more to go, but I've started to think about the idea about the importance of financial wealth, of having wealth, and independent control of that wealth, not having to do with the man in her life or any man in her life. And it sounds very modern, doesn't it? So we're going to have to reflect a little bit on that. It doesn't really feel like a stereotype that we might think of an ancient woman. But for our purposes, thank goodness she had money, because once she had money, it means there's documents that dealt with some of that money and some of the legalities in her life. And then those documents were preserved for us. So that's why we can learn about her. Okay, so before we go on to our next two women, we can pause now. I think we have some questions. Should I stop? I'm not really sure. I think we're set up differently today. I'll stop the sharing. There we go. We can see I can see Carol's face now. So Carol, I think we have
Hi,
some questions.
Anna. I actually have a question for you.
Great.
Oh, are you okay?
I'm fine.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, I thought you said wait. Okay.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
No,
Okay. Okay, I'm ready. Go
this
for it.
seems to be an unusual freedom and standing for a woman. Was this typical in the non-Jewish Egypt as well?
Right. So this is the interesting thing. I really wanted to be able to put things in context for us. And so I did do a little bit of extra research. And I originally, and in the interest of time, I I'm holding myself back, but we do have a spectacular story, for anyone who knows it, about the daughters of Tzlofchad in the Torah itself, about women fighting and achieving the ability to have land inheritances from their father. And so that is an even more ancient idea in Judaism than our story. And it goes back to the time of the Torah. This is at the, well, this is around the time of the closing of the Tanakh, around the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, when they are coming back from the first destruction and rebuilding. So I would love to say, like, oh, the Jews were so forward thinking. It was only the Jews. But as it turns out, there are archaeologists know from other documents of other peoples that lived in Babylonia and Persia, that women, not all women, but that women did have the ability to, under certain circumstances, own their own property and have control of how it would be gifted or transmitted in terms of, death and inheritance. So it's so interesting because it certainly does not reflect what many of us think about in terms of women and money based on very recent times. I'm certain that there are people on this, not to make any assumptions about ages of people on the call, but that I'm told that in the decade in which I was born, that even until the 1960s, that women in the United States and Canada needed to have co-signers on credit cards and other major financial documents, and that they couldn't get them alone, certainly not single women and maybe not even married women. So I did a little bit of research. I was going to share it with you at the end. Apparently, the major shift happened in the West, at least. I'm not really familiar with what happened in the East, but in the Western world, in the 1100s, apparently in England, that there was a major shift in the financial and economic kind of regardings of people and of married couples, and that as a consequence of that, women could started not being able to have their own control over their own finances. And then that wasn't rectified until in little drips and drabs, like I guess around the time of the French Revolution, 1800s, 1700s, slowly until the 20th century. Of course, there are still countries in the world today when women don't have that kind of control over their own funds, I'm assuming, right?
A couple of more.
Yes,
Is there
please.
still a Jewish community
Oh,
on that island?
and no. As far as I know, I don't know how many Jews are left in Egypt. There might be people on this. There definitely are Jews of Egyptian descent that live in Toronto. I think most of them were either from Cairo or Alexandria, and I think this was much further away. I'm not even sure there's a you'd have to look it up on Google Maps, but which is where I got this map from. You'd have to like kind of open it up even further to see if there's even a modern city in that area or if it's just known from archaeological remains. I'm not sure, but definitely not Jews.
And another one, where do you find these documents, the ones that you're referring to?
These documents, well, the one that I've been referring to, I have been teaching about this for years and years. I'm trying to remember where I originally found it. I think, wait a minute. I'm just turning around to look at my library for a minute. Hold on.
Yeah.
There is an amazing book. Here it is. About being at home on Zoom. The JPS Guide to Jewish Women. Okay, amazing little paperback book. I give this as bat mitzvah gifts all the time. Shocking. I try to have enough courage to give it as a bar mitzvah gift too, depending on the family. And it has little snippets about these women and so many more. And then there's other footnotes in here that will tell you where the original sources are from. So I don't remember how I originally learned. I've been studying this stuff for years. My first course I took on women's Jewish history was when I did the 1 year program after grade 13. So that's how you know it was a very long time ago. I'm at the Hebrew University. So I've been accumulating this knowledge for a long time. But this is an amazing, very, very accessible book. I certainly recommend it.
Thank you. And two more. Could you please compare the time to Moses?
Yes, so that's why I wanted to show the timeline in the beginning, but I know it's really hard to understand. You can spend a little time of it with on your own with it. But so Moses would be from the time the beginning of the Torah, right? The book of shows up in the book of Exodus, goes through the end of, dies at the end of the book of Deuteronomy. After that, we have the whole time period of, we saw the breakdown of the Tanakh when we were talking about Judith, right? We have the whole Pentateuch or Chumash. Then we have all of the books of the prophets or Nevi'im. And then we have the books of the Ketuvim, or writings. So right at the end of the books of the Ketuvim or writings, there's some very important historical books called Ezra and Nehemiah. Now, you might not have heard of them because they don't have synagogue uses, right? We don't read them as part of the holidays or even as part of the Haftorot or anything like that. So they're not as well known. But those are the stories of when the Jews came back to the land of Israel after the first exile with the exile with the destruction of the first temple, which was in 586 BCE, and that's really right around the time that we were talking about with Babatha. So it's after, way after the time of Moses. We have the Moses death, and then we have all of the prophets, then almost all of the writings, and then that would be around the time period that we just talked about.
And last question for now, do
Mhm.
we have enough information about the economics of that time to
Mhm.
be able to judge the level of wealth that this woman possessed?
That's a good question. I think I was just making an assumption based on um, understanding of, this is going to sound like kind of like some kind of Marxist economic theory that I don't know a lot about or hardly anything about. But my assumption is that I don't think has there ever been, well, I guess there is now, not very often in history has there been a real community where everyone has been rich. Like I just don't think that's really existed so much in history. I mean, maybe artificially today in some tiny little oil rich Arab states, maybe that's the case, that a lot of people, that there's a lot of wealth. But for the most part, I think in general economic history, there's always been distribution of wealth, and generally the majority of the people have been poor. And I think it's not until the 20th century that we see even the rise of the middle class. Now I'm talking about things I really know nothing about, but it's things I've heard about. And
Sounds
so
good.
my assumption is that wealth is, extreme wealth, ownership of more than one home, if and more, is something that would not be true of everyone. It's just not. It couldn't. I don't think life could sustain itself that way. I don't think that would work.
Okay, a couple more questions have come in, but let's let you continue and we'll ask them
Okay.
after.
Yeah, maybe they'll
Okay?
apply to the next two women
Sure.
too. We can see, compare and contrast with them. Okay, I told you this stuff is wild and wacky because you wouldn't have heard about it before. So anyway, I hope that it's of interest. It sounds like it is. Here we go. Back to our next woman. Her name is Babatha. Okay, Babatha, and she lived in Israel. Okay, this one is in Israel. Now, interestingly, the other two women we're talking about are in diaspora communities. This one is in the land of Israel, but when the land of Israel was controlled by the Roman Empire. So this is after the destruction of the Second Temple, which was 70 CE. And many Jews were exiled because of that. Many Jews were killed, but then also Jews did stay in the land of Israel as well. And we know about this woman, as you'll see in a minute, because of documents that she left behind. And they were discovered in a place called the Cave of Letters in the Judean desert. If people know of the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's from around the same geographical area, the same kind of idea where documents were preserved in the dry desert air, but this is not the same as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Okay, now I have a 3-minute video for you showing you the cave where this was found and introducing the woman we're talking about. And it is from a old Nova show on PBS that was talking about the archaeology in this region. So I hope it comes through. It's about a 3-minute clip from a much longer TV show.
A woman climbs off the ladder toward him.
Hannah Cotton is an authority on ancient languages. She spent years studying the papers and personal items found by Yadin.
Cotton removes her safety helmet.
She jumped at the chance to explore the...
A woman climbs off the ladder
I'm
toward
sorry.
him.
I started it again.
Hannah Cotton
Sorry.
is
Here
an
we go.
authority on ancient languages. She spent years studying the papers and personal items found by Yadin.
Cotton removes her safety helmet.
She jumped at the chance to explore the cave firsthand, despite the difficult climb.
Wonderful, huh? My goodness, I never thought I'd make it here.
She scans the canyon view from the cave's opening.
Can't understand how women and children can make it up here.
A recreation shows a woman with a child.
The life of one ancient woman in particular captivates Hannah Cotton. Her name was Babatha, a widow and mother in her 30s when the rebellion began. She was related to Yehonatan, the military commander mentioned in Bar Kokhba's documents. It seems she fled with him to the Cave of Letters. Babatha was an ordinary woman of her time, but we know her life in extraordinary detail, thanks to a cache of 35 personal papers she left hidden in this cave.
Hannah Cotton, Hebrew University of Jerusalem.
So, here is where they found the famous Babatha archive. That Jewish woman who ended up her life here in this cave, and her purse was found here by Adin.
Ancient writing fills a page.
Babatha's purse contained documents written in Aramaic and Greek, the official languages of the day. Wedding contracts, property deeds, bills of sale, and more. Because women had only limited rights under either Jewish or Roman law, Babatha guarded her documents carefully.
In a recreation, she covers her pages with rocks.
The first time we hear about her is when she got married for the first time. The husband died, and she was left with an orphan who was a minor. They appointed 2 guardians. And then she started a series of litigation with these guardians that she thought were both incompetent, and I think she also thinks that they were cheats.
Now, a date palm's fronds stretch outward.
Babatha probably lived a comfortable life before the Bar Kokhba uprising. Her papers show that she owned a date orchard in the prosperous town of En-Gedi on the western shore of the Dead Sea.
Richard Freund.
Okay, so that was a lot of information. Don't worry, I'm going to go over it and we'll add even more information. So this woman, Babatha, she's known because of these 13 documents that were found together, as that scholar, Hannah Cotton, archaeologist, said they were in her purse. They were secured somehow together in a briefcase. And they were found together, originally discovered by archaeologists in 1961 in the Judean desert. And we know that they come from around the 2nd century CE, so really around the year 100, let's say, CE. And we know that because there was a reference there to a revolt that happened, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, and we know the timing of the revolt. So we know that she lived in at least 2 different towns near the Dead Sea, and somehow, even though it's a desert, that they were able to successfully grow date palms there, and we'll see that's part of where her wealth came from in both of those cities. So then we know from this documentation that she inherited property from her father, including several date orchards. Okay, so that definitely would have been worth, that's not only, property, land, but that's property that then grows a crop that I suppose can be sold for money as well. We know that by 124 CE, that she already had been married and she was widowed at that time. And this is the fight that had to go on about the guardians that had been appointed for her son. She had a minor son, and so I suppose, and there was wealth involved, that there was an idea that she couldn't be a single mother that would be involved with all of the finances. That would be, I guess, that the son was inheriting as well. And so the interesting thing here, and this is so interesting in terms of starting to see, like we did in the last example, of what it means to be Jewish in a diaspora community and being involved with your non-Jewish neighbors, which is something we all have, familiarity with. And here she's living a very Jewish life, but she has to deal with the authorities at the time. And the authorities, the people who were in charge of the land of Israel, were the Romans. And so she had to go by their laws, I guess, in terms of these finances concerning her son. So then a few years later, she married someone else, a guy named Judah. It's of En-Gedi, so from around the same area. It turns out she was his second wife. That means, and he still had the first one. She knew about it, and of course, this still existed, just like it happened in ancient biblical times. It still happened in this time as well. Under Jewish law, it would be absolutely permissible. He obviously was older than her because he had a daughter of marriageable age. Well, how do we learn that? Well, we learned that because she ended up lending him money. She has enough money that she can lend him money for the wedding gift he gave his daughter. Interesting. Now here, this longer paragraph in the middle talks also a little bit about the interplay of that she was a strong woman that was in charge of her finances, but that also within a certain way, could be involved in the legalities involved with that, involving the Roman overlords of the land. So we know that, for instance, that she had to travel to this other place in the year she was married, to declare her previously held property to the Roman governor of Arabia during a Roman census. So I'm assuming this had something to do with taxation, that they had to say, how much money that they had, what they had items of worth, probably in order to be taxed by the Roman authorities. So she traveled. She didn't send her husband. She went with him. But interestingly, I guess because of the law of the land, he had to act as her legal guardian in the process. Nevertheless, she was definitely involved. Okay, only 3 years later, she was widowed again, and she had been promised, I guess, as part of her ketubah, her marriage document, that she would receive money after her husband's death. She did not, so she had to be involved in appropriating her late husband's date crop. That was the way they made money there in En-Gedi, instead of that marriage settlement that she had not been paid by his surviving family. Remember, there's multiple families going on here because he had another first wife as well. And we know that got even nastier, that a year later she was embroiled in a legal battle with her co-widow over the possessions of their dead husband. So we know about it because there were then legal documents that were involved in trying to figure out who owned what. So there was some money that she was in charge of, but then there were rules that she couldn't be in charge of everything. And then there was a fight over money, which unfortunately, does happen in families, but she didn't just take it lying down. She got involved in a legal battle in order to get what she deserved. Okay, so that's what we know. Oh, a little bit more. So just in terms of the date, all of the documents are actually dated, which is actually the beautiful thing about legal documents, is that they generally have the date on them. Archaeologists are not always that blessed, do not always get that information laid out in front of them. But we also know that she probably lost her life as a consequence of the Bar Kokhba revolt, which was a war that was fought in the land of Israel, where the Jews tried to shake off the control of the Roman Empire. It was successful for about 2.5 years, but by the year 135, there was quite a bit of destruction and death as a result of it being a failure. And the reason why she ended up in those caves is as a consequence of that war. She had a connection based on the family to get her a hiding place, basically, as a refugee of war. And they hid up in that cave. And as far as we know, everyone in that cave did not survive. So that is Babatha's story. I've got one more for you named Rufina. Now, anyone reads ancient Greek, they can read this transcription of a inscription that actually archaeologists have known about since the 1800s. And in case you can't read on your own, no problem. I'm going to help you with it. But first, I just want to show you where it was found. It was found in what's known as Smyrna. In ancient times, it was called Smyrna. It has a different name in modern times, Izmir, I forget what, but in modern day Turkey. So you see where it is there on the map. And it was part of the Roman Empire at the time. And this is still early in the Roman Empire, much like our last story of Babatha. So even though the Romans eventually spread Latin as a language, that in the early stages here in this part of the world, the people speaking still spoke Greek, even though it was the Latin, it was the Roman Empire. Okay, so who is this woman, Rufina? She lived in Smyrna, as I said, and she commissioned a Greek inscription that we just saw on a marble slab. And we know it's from the 2nd century. And this is what it said. Rufina, a Jewess. It actually says that, so we know for sure she was Jewish. And then it says in Greek, Archeologos, the head of the synagogue, built this tomb for her freed slaves and the slaves raised in her household. No one else has the right to bury anyone here. Anyone who dares do so will pay this amount of money to the sacred treasury and another 1,000 denarii type of money to the Jewish people or the Jewish community. An inscription, a copy of this inscription has been placed in the public archives. That's what it said there on that slab of marble that was engraved with Greek. This is the translation, and there's a lot here to talk about, an amazing amount considering it's just a few words on a slab of engraved in a slab of marble. So before we get there, let's talk about all of the different things that we can talk about. So first of all, Rufina, interestingly, apparently is a Latin name, even though it's written in Greek. And she identifies immediately as a Jewess. Also, I think so interesting in terms of diaspora Jewry, to what this means, to juggle different identities and different cultures all in ourselves. We're speaking in English now, right? But talking about very Jewish ideas. So she and many of us have names that are from different countries, and yet we're speaking in English about Jewish ideas. So too with Rufina, Latin name, and she identifies right away as a Jewess. It says she's the head of a synagogue. Don't worry, we're going to get back to that. Okay, we'll get back to that. That's a hot phrase. Let's just talk a little bit, though, in terms of the money again. How do we know that she existed? She had enough money to leave something of that would survive the ages, something engraved on a marble slab. This was not an inexpensive endeavor. And then it has been preserved for us. So we know she had many slaves and she took care of her slaves, all right? So it looks to me like she was caring, right, for her slaves. She buried them appropriately, but she was rich. That's why she had so many slaves. Then she has authority, and she not only has authority that she feels that she can write down that no one else has the right to use this tomb, but she can also have a legal threat here to say, if you break this rule, you're going to have to pay a fine, not only to the local Roman authority, that would be the sacred treasury, and we know that especially because the last line as it continues, but also to the local Jewish community. So if you break the rules, you're going to have 2 fines from 2 different authorities, which is also really interesting in terms of the Jewish community and in terms and their interplay with the non-Jewish authorities, and also her connection to both of those communities. And we know for sure that that sacred treasury is, the Roman authorities, especially reinforced by this last line here. A copy of this inscription has been placed in the public archives. That would have been with the Roman authorities. That means it's official, like it's been published. It's not a secret. This is a rule that's been established and everyone knows about it, and therefore it has authority. So she's really making herself known, is establishing a legal threat, is establishing her connection to the Roman authorities and the Jewish authorities. We know again that she's rich. We know she kind of has a foot in Judaism, as well as some connection to Latin and some connection to Greek. And we know there's no men mentioned on this slab. She's not even identified as so-and-so the daughter of someone or so-and-so the wife of someone. She is there stand alone, so we can assume at least a tremendous amount about her independence. Now let's talk more about this head of the synagogue business. So we have titles that are found by archaeologists from the ancient world. I've listed them for you on the top of your screen. We have the term, and all of these would have feminine endings. So ancient Greek, much like Hebrew or French or many other languages, you can tell if a title or certain nouns or certain adjectives are feminine or masculine based on the grammar, right? Based usually on how the word is conjugated or how the end of the word is. So Greek is one of those languages. So all of these terms, which could look gender neutral if you saw them just in English, in Greek, they're definitely female, feminine forms of the words. So we have the term patron, elder, head of the synagogue, that's what we're talking about, and also mother of the synagogue. All of these titles are found on different inscriptions from tombs and ancient synagogues in Israel, Egypt, Syria, and Greece. So what the heck do these titles mean, right? Are they only honorary titles that are granted to the women themselves because of their involvement in their community in different ways? Or perhaps not even because of their involvement, maybe because they're married to men of order, we're familiar with, for instance, in some synagogues, that the Rebbitzin is the wife of the rabbi. The Rebbitzin doesn't have any rabbinic or community training herself necessarily. Some do now, but she just gets the title Rebbitzin because she is married to the rabbi. So perhaps all of these were titles that worked that way. Perhaps they had to do with money. We do know, like it says here, perhaps you're based on charitable donations. On ancient synagogues, we do have, just like in modern synagogues, sometimes plaques or inscriptions of donors who donated parts of those synagogues. And so maybe this is a way of conferring an honorable title on a woman who had control of her own money. We saw that was definitely a thing, and donated to the synagogue, and therefore she wanted to the synagogue wanted to bestow a title of honor on her. These are all maybes because we don't know for sure. Now, the most potentially exciting other way of looking at it is maybe these were actually roles in the synagogue. Maybe these were leadership and ritual roles. In fact, the scholar who's kind of pushes that perspective most strongly is named Bernadette Bruton. So I think I have her book too, but I'm not going to go look for it now. And others have challenged the view that these titles were purely honorific. Like, when archaeologists started finding them, are like, oh, women in Judaism don't have roles like this. They must mean something else. It must be an honorary title. But she and other scholars say that bringing evidence that some positions could have offered women limited influence and power, namely religious or ritual power. And actually, there are other pagan and early Christian communities that were in around the same area in the early Rome, in this part of the Roman Empire, in which women did have ritual roles. And so the idea is that she said if those other contemporary women had ritual roles who were not in Jewish communities, perhaps their Jewish neighbors also had availability of ritual roles for women, although we have to really make this up because such theories are, as I said here, difficult to prove, particularly in a patriarchal legal system, and because none of this is preserved for us in any rabbinic literature, not a hint of it. So the idea that women could have had this ritual role is only found for us in archaeology, and either was not embraced by the rabbis or not recorded by the rabbis, or perhaps we're making too much out of it, and perhaps it really was only honorary. The truth is, we don't know. So there's a lot that we could talk about the history of rabbinic and religious leadership roles for women in Judaism, but I'm just giving you this taste of it here, and I think we'll leave the rest of it for another time. So I think we have some questions. Carol, do we?
We do.
Great.
One question was, where can you get the JPS guide that you mentioned?
Oh, I think you can get it on Amazon or Indigo or whatever. It's a yeah, I'm pretty sure it's still in print. JPS as a sub, yeah, I think you can get it just on. I've bought it on Amazon and on Indigo. I think, like I said, I've given it as bat mitzvah gift.
Good. And one more, just one point about women in modern society being able to have and control wealth. Yes. Even in Victorian times, women lost their rights over their property once they married. At that point in time, their actual title and control, etc., was surrendered to their husbands.
Right. So like I said, I believe I could share it with you. I mean, I don't think we have time now, but historians, I think, trace that to be even earlier than that, starting a shift in England, though, also interestingly, even from a few hundred years before that. And then I guess what was totally natural in ancient times, which is kind of shocking to think about, in terms of women having the ability to have control, over this aspect, not all parts of their lives, but this parts of their lives, was taken away. And then society really evolved very differently because of it, could argue.
And the last question, which really isn't for you, it's for the other Anna. Well, first part for you. I loved your lectures and would enjoy, revisiting them. Will I be able to access them on the Shul's website? So I know they're being recorded.
They're on YouTube already. You guys post them.
Yes, they're all on YouTube. Thank you, Anna. And I've sent the links every time I send the link for this program. At the bottom of the email, if you scroll down, you'll see the links for every one of the sessions. So once this is done, I'll send another email with all 6 sessions.
And I know they work because my mother's older sister, who lives in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, has been watching them on YouTube, at her own leisure. So it's nice that they exist. Thank you for my family that they exist.
Well, Anna, I have to thank you. It has been a most phenomenal series. We constantly are getting comments and praise for you. And now I'm going to share with everybody that Randy and I met with you yesterday, and there's going to be something else coming. So please watch for it. Wednesday at 2:00. Hold on to that time. And
next week, I think.
Pardon? Okay. Well,
not next week. I don't.
No, not next week. But just don't go on to another series at that time, because Anna's coming back to us with just more interesting subject and topics. And as I said, I think at the very beginning, this is the best of all worlds. I get to listen to a historical scholar. I get to learn some new stuff, and I don't have to take any exams.
That's right.
So,
and you don't have to put on your winter coat now. That's
that's true. I don't. So I thank you so much. It has been wonderful, and look forward to continuing our relationship and hearing more from you.
Terrific. So I'll see you soon.
Right.
Lehitraot, as they say in Hebrew.
Yeah. And I just want to comment about go ahead, Anna.
I just wanted to echo what Carol said. Thank you so much, Anna. And I also wanted to thank the women of Adath. So Carol, Randy, and Giti, and the rest of the women of Adath for putting this on and organizing it and being so active at Adath Israel. So
yeah, it's been good, when we have this. And so a couple of other programs. Come to Israel with us tonight on Good Food and Friends at 6:30. We're going to be visiting the beaches of Israel. So don't forget your sunscreen, as people keep reminding me. And if you haven't ordered yet, get some food from a kosher caterer or kosher restaurant in the city, or make your own, and come have fun in the sand. And we have another program on Monday. It's called Spruce Up Your Space. And we were contacted by Adath Israel in Montreal, in Hampstead actually, who contacted us and said, we are both Adath Israels. We have this program. Would you like to join us? And we said yes. So Monday, February 15th at 8 p.m. You can join us on the website. Just register. There's no charge for it. And they're working with some designers here actually in Toronto. And Rabbi Seed is going to speak, as well as their rabbi. And we're looking forward to it. And we have other programs that we're in the works of pulling together. So we're excited. Oh, the other one is See Yourself on the Bima. The clergy have set some dates and times for various learning opportunities. And again, just sign up for them. And it's for men and women, all of our programs. We enjoy having both sexes there. So just if you're interested, and please tell other people about our programs. You don't have to be a member of Adath. We're happy that we're putting these forward. And, on behalf of the women of Adath, thank you all for coming to this webinar, and I look forward to seeing you and meeting more people at the next ones.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye, Anna. Thank you.
Bye-bye. My pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.